Good morning, everyone here in New Mexico. Good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast, and good evening to those that have joined us from across the pond. Welcome to the Planetary Sample Science Seminar Series, or PSS, as we call it. Today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Danielle Adams. Dr. Danielle Adams is a cultural astronomer who studies the development and transformations of indigenous Arabian astronomy through pre-Islamic poetry and Arabic historical literature. She is active in informal astronomy education, speaking to various groups about Arabian cultural astronomy and the heritage of the many Arabic star names that astronomers still use today. Danielle serves as the interim executive director of the Flagstaff Dark Skies Coalition and uses the inspiration of pristine desert skies to advocate for the modern day preservation of dark skies. And Danielle, I think that's enough for me. We are super excited for your talk, The Moon and Arabian Skies, Stages, Stations, and Standstills. Oh my, Danielle, take it away.
Thanks so much, Quentin, and thanks to everyone who is gathered there at UNM and to those online. I especially want to thank Chip Shearer for inviting me to participate in this series. This is going to be a different talk from the ones that have happened before now, in that we're taking a little side trip to the world of cultural astronomy. I don't study the moon itself in terms of its properties and whatnot. I study how people interact with the night sky and the celestial objects in it, including the moon. And my focus for a long time has been on indigenous Arabian astronomy. So today we're going to take a look at a few aspects of how the moon has played a really strong role in Arabian astronomy over time. And to start out here on the title slide, this is an image I took from Chaco Canyon a month ago. I was with a glamping group called Heritage Inspirations, and we did an overnight in Chaco Canyon and enjoyed watching the moon rise under those pristine desert skies, just as many have in countless centuries before us, and all the way around the world. One of the things I love about cultural astronomy is that when you have the same latitude, you pretty much have the same sky. And so we have the same data points, the dots in the sky. And so the different stories that arise, the different ways that the dots are connected, this is pure culture coming through. And so it's really fascinating to see how much difference there is, but also how much similarity there is across cultures. So let me advance here. I'm going to start us off. As this is a talk on cultural astronomy, I do want to acknowledge where I am sitting, and certainly at UNM, you are sitting in a special place as well. And so for me, here in Flagstaff, I'm sitting at the base of mountain sacred to many tribes throughout this region, including the Acoma, San Carlos Apache, Tonto Apache, White Mountain Apache, Havasupai, Hopi, Hualapai, Navajo, San Juan Southern Paiute, Tewa, Fort McDowell Yavapai, Yavapai Apache, Yavapai Prescott, and Zuni, as well as the ancient peoples of the ancestral Puebloans, Hohokam, Mogollon, and Sinawa. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. So cultural astronomy is the study of how societies relate to celestial objects and their appearance in the night sky. This is essentially the cultural anthropology of astronomy. And there are many different directions where the study can go. You can be historical, as much of my research is. You can research contemporary societies. There are people who research contemporary modern astronomers and how they relate to our own society or other societies around the world. So this is a wide open field. And excitingly, the IAU has just opened up Commission C5 in cultural astronomy as of August during the meetings in South Africa. And so I encourage you to go to the website and learn a little bit more and get involved if this is something that intersects with your own interests. All right, so here in Flagstaff, I sit at 35.2 degrees north. I believe they're in Albuquerque, you're 36 or so. And so if we trace this red line around the globe, these are the places that have exactly the same sky as we do. We just see the sky at different points in time as we encounter darkness. Now, the area that I'm speaking of is the Middle East, and especially the Arabian Peninsula. And so, you know, if you're within 15, 20 degrees, maybe more of that latitude line, you're going to share a huge portion of the same sky. And so there are many modern star names that we use today that derive from indigenous Arabian astronomy. Names like Vega, Betelgeuse, Altair, Rigel, many names in our modern sky that are not Arabic descriptions of Greek astronomy, but are Arabic descriptions of indigenous Arabian astronomy. And when I talk about indigenous Arabian astronomy, I'm referring to the astronomy that existed before the introduction of Greek astronomy to Arabia, and also before the subsequent introductions of Indian astronomy and Chinese astronomy to Arabia. Those interactions fundamentally transformed Arabian astronomy and resulted in, excuse me, in huge processes of cultural change. So, you know, the challenge always in my work is the records that we have. And most of the written records were composed after the development of Islam and often after the introduction of Greek astronomy. And I find more than 1,000 years ago, people who are doing work not dissimilar to what I'm doing today, that we're finding that the old traditions were being lost. And so they were trying to document these ancient traditions that were largely oral. And then we can also use poetry and trace information back to the known death dates or birth dates when we have them of poets. And so we have some information that we know for sure existed even before the time of Islam, so to the early 500s CE. And other information we can't really date. We only know that it existed when it was written down, maybe in the middle 800s or the 900s. And so, you know, it appears to be not related to Greek astronomy or Indian astronomy. And so it appears to be indigenous as well, but we can't tie a particular date to its inception. And so this is the uncertainty that I deal with in my work. And so as we proceed, know that this is an undercurrent of what I'm going to share here. So first, I want to talk about stages. And in Arabic, stages of the moon is manazil al-qamar. We're going to see that that exact same phrasing has a completely different meaning in the next section that follows. But for now, we'll talk about stages of the moon. So, of course, we have the moon orbiting the Earth. We know that the moon goes through phases. And, you know, we know today that the moon is tidally locked to the Earth. So we always see mostly the same side of the moon, aside from libration and other effects that give us a little bit of a peek around the dark side of the moon. Now, we tend to focus on the phases themselves, but there is an interesting relationship that is well documented in Arabian astronomy. And that relationship is between this phase of the moon and the length of its stay in our skies. So let's go through a sample lunar month. This one is for December, just because we could start and end with a new moon here. In Arabian astronomy, and indeed in modern Islamic astronomy, the month begins not with the astronomical new moon, but with the first sighting of the new crescent. So that could be on day 1 or day 2, or maybe day 3, rarely, depending on how weather is and the timing of the new moon. So whatever that first sighting of the crescent is, that's the first day of the month. In Arabic, it's al-hilal, and this word is specifically for the crescent on its first night or 2, maybe, of visibility. After that point, the moon is called al-qamar, and that is the generic term for the moon. And so that lasts until the last couple days of the month, when again we have another tiny crescent moon. Now, for every 3 days of the lunar month, there was a specific term that collectively referred to the moon during those 3 days. And when you start looking into this, at first it seems like, oh, they're describing the moon. And a little bit they are, but then you start to understand that, wait, they're also describing the night during which the moon is taking place. So the first 3 days, nights 1 through 3, are called el-ghurar, the white spots, and it's compared in the literature to a horse's blaze on its nose, or maybe its chest or neck, the white spot on a horse. And it's just this little sliver of a moon, and this is where we start. And so you could say, well, okay, that can describe the moon. You know, a horse's blaze can look like that. But also just a little sliver of moonlight in the course of the night is also an interpretation. Now we get to the second set of 3 nights, and these were called al-shuhab, the gray ones. And this is described as white and black mixed together, and it's compared to gray horses. So now, okay, this is getting a little bit fuzzier, right? Are we still talking about the moon itself, or are we talking about the night where the moonlight is mixed with the black of night? The next 3, al-buhr, the overwhelming ones. And these are the nights where the moon is bright enough that its light is overwhelming the darkness, and it's harder to see the fainter stars. And so you can see in the chart here, you know, we might have, first quarter at this point going into gibbous phases. Again, there's going to be a little bit of variation depending when that first moon occurs. So the moon is becoming much brighter at this point. The next 3 is al-rashar, the 10s. And here we have the one departure from descriptions of brightness. This is called so only because it includes the 10th night. And so it's the 10th night and the other nights around the 10th night. And then we get to the next 3, which include the full moon, al-bid, the white ones. And here it's called the white nights, or the white ones, because we have moonlight all the night long. On the 13th night, which is just before the full moon, we have this dusk-colored night. There's no explanation for that, so it's a little bit less light than a full moon. And then, of course, we have the full moon itself, al-Badr. And as many of you may know, the full moon is something like 2 times brighter than a 95% illuminated moon because of the albedo effect, where we're looking directly at the moon with the sun almost directly behind us. And so that full moon is much, much brighter than the moon on the night before or the moon one night afterwards. And so when this full moon is rising, it was often described as al-buhur, dazzling, when it's rising. And of course, there is a psychological effect of seeing the moon rise, a full moon especially, with its brightness amidst elements of the landscape, and that creates this psychological perception that the moon is in fact much bigger than it actually is. Okay, so then the next 3 nights are Al-Dura, and this is compared to the sheep whose fronts are black and whose rear parts are white. And here we're talking about the night, because after full moon, the moon waits a little bit before it rises, whereas before full moon, the moon is already in the sky when night falls. And so here, this is a description of the night. But again, if you look at the moon in these gibbous phases after full moon, that gibbous phase shows the darkness on the front and the fullness on the other half of it. So again, it's a bit ambiguous here, but some of the commentary for this word talks about the nights themselves and how the moon tarries in rising. And so then the next 3 are al-Khuns, the withdrawn ones. And here the moon is described as delaying a lot in its rising and waiting before it shows its face. And then the next 3 are al-Duhum, the deep black ones. So now we are describing the blackness of the night. And here that darkness is described like the deep black of riding animals. And then the next set of 3, al-Quhum, the intruders. This word was given to these 3 because here the moon is imagined to be plunging headlong into its meeting with the sun, almost carelessly, as things escalate in the diminishing of the size of the crescent. And then the final 3 nights are the runners. And this is interesting. This word describes how camels run when they go very fast. Camels don't move like horses. In most of their natural walking or running gaits, camels move their 2 right legs together and then their 2 left legs together. And so when they're walking, it's called an amble. When they're doing kind of their standard running, it's called a pace, not a gallop, because it's a different set of footfalls. But when they run beyond the pace, that's when they lose that right side, left side structure, and they have footfalls that are more rapid, like a gallop or a very fast run. And so this is what this word is talking about. And it seems to be hinting at this idea that things are changing very quickly and there's very little of the moon left and we're going to lose it very soon. So these 3 nights each have their own names. At the end of the month, the 28th night is Dajat, the black-eyed one. The 30th or the 29th is Dahmat, the deep black one. And then the 30th night is a Laylat, the dark of night. So these here are clearly describing the night, but they're going in gradations of darkness because they're considering the amount of moonlight that is a portion of the night. So it's a different approach, right? So it's not just describing the appearance of the moon itself, but it's considering the moonlight that is cast by the moon amidst the rest of the night in terms of its duration and its brightness and intensity. It's a very different view. So then we have this relationship between the phase of the moon and the length of its stay in the night sky. So this graphic here charts out the first half of November, the first 10 nights or so, as you would consider it in Arabia. And we start with the first tiny crescent moon on the bottom, and then each night I've added a moon in its phases, right? And so this is looking at the same time of night, about 45 minutes after sunset. And you can see that each night the moon is further to the east in the sky. And so as the Earth rotates, it has longer to go before it disappears into the western horizon. And this was recalled specifically in a series of rhymed prose. And so on these next slides, we're going to go through these first 10 nights of the moon. And for each night, we have a piece of rhymed prose that was recited in English here. We'll see later, it's a complex process to get these to rhyme. And I'm trying to find ways to not have to use old every time. So we'll see where I get with that at a later time. But in Arabic, it certainly does rhyme. I'll read this one in Arabic so that you can get a sense for it. إذا كان ابن ليلى أطمت سخيلة حل أهلها برميلة. And so you can hear that Ayla at the end of each of those three phrases. In these graphics on the bottom right, I have added the night number and the duration. This is how long the moon is above the horizon from the moment of sunset. So here, this is just an hour and 11 minutes, and we're looking at the sky here 45 minutes after sunset. So we only have less than half an hour left. So here, when the moon is 1 night old, it is the duration of the evening feed of a little lamb whose owners alighted in a small patch of sand. So already, the focus here is on duration. So this 1 hour or maybe half an hour of its visibility, 45 minutes, depending on how your skies are that night. This is just a short bit of time, and it's like how long a little lamb might feed at night. On night 2, now we've got 2 hours. When the moon is 2 nights old, it is the conversation of 2 slave girls with lying and deceit. So we have 2 people, maybe don't know each other very well. It's not a huge conversation. Night 3, now we've got 3 hours. When the moon is 3 nights old, it is the conversation of young women not united by affection. So here, again, it's a conversation, but now maybe they're a little bit closer, but not really close. So it's not a very long conversation. When the moon is 4 nights old, it is the duration of the evening feed of a young spring camel that is not hungry nor suckled. So now we go back to an animal, but this is an older, larger animal that is going to drink milk longer, or going to eat longer. When the moon is 5 nights old, it is conversation and companionship, and the remainder of the dinner of pregnant camels whose heads and necks bend towards their backs. This is a very specific Arabic word, qars, that describes a pregnant camel whose head or neck basically inclines, curves towards their backs. likely due to the pregnancy and the stage of the pregnancy. So this is longer. When the moon is 6 nights old, it is twisting and grinding by turning towards the left and from the left. This is a little bit difficult to get in the Arabic, but the commentaries describe this as basically a time that is fit for working, probably in part due to the increasing light. This night 6 was where we start to transition into those moon phases where they're overcoming, the light is overcoming the darkness, but also we have a long duration. When the moon is 7 nights old, it is the night journeying of the hyena. When the moon is 8 nights old, it is a brilliant moon. So again, that's that overcoming brightness. When the moon is 9 nights old, the onyx is gathered during it. And this was described as being the case because there was such light and there was such clarity that you could actually distinguish onyx from the rest of the ground easily. And when the moon is 10 nights old, it is the choker of the dawn. Another version says that it approaches the dawn. And so with the moon being up for 11 hours, it sets just a couple hours before the light of dawn starts to fill the eastern horizon. So again, we have this tracking of the phases of the moon, but we're not really concerned about the moon's appearance. We're concerned about how long it's up and relating that length of its stay in the night to different elements in Arabian life. All right, and this gets us then to the stations of the moon, because as you have these progressions of the moon spends the night longer and longer in the sky. And so we've been noticing that the moon travels against the background stars. And if you can keep following this travel of the moon, you end up being able to create seasonal calendars. And we're going to see some examples of that. So these purple circles here highlight asterisms, small groups of stars that the moon might stop near. And so these asterisms were named and became prominent in the journey of the moon. Essentially, what we have here is we have the creation of a lunar zodiac rather than the solar zodiac of 12 constellations through which the sun passes nominally once a month. It's not actually the case, but roughly. Here in the night sky, if we consider the moon's course through the sky, again, through similar constellations as the sun takes its path, then we have a lunar zodiac of 27 or usually 28 asterisms. And so in the Arabian context, we can see in the path of the moon, it starts in the Scorpion, and actually this very first young crescent was at the heart of the Scorpion. And then we have the raised tail of the Scorpion, the ostriches, the wasteland, which was quite unusual. It's actually an area devoid of bright stars. So it's sort of an absence of stars. And then we have 4 that are called the auspices. And they are a subset of a group of 10 asterisms, all in the same area of sky that were called the auspices. So we have the auspice of the slaughterer, the voracious auspice, the auspice of auspices, and then this one here is the auspice of woolen tents, because it's 4 stars in the shape of a triangle with a star in the middle. And so the star in the middle was imagined to be this pole that would hold up the tent, a 3-sided tent. And then we have the front spout and the rear spout. You might recognize these stars as the square of Pegasus. In Arabian astronomy, the square was the well bucket. And so every side was a spout. These 2 stars rose and set first, so they were the front spout, and the other 2 were the rear. And so let's take a look at some of the traditions that arise connected to these stars. And I'm going to use the Scorpion first because it's timely. The rising of these stars at the end of the night is what was critical. And so this is coming up here in November, so it's timely for us. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of process here. So this is the original Arabic text. And a challenge we have is that oftentimes the text isn't fully voweled. Arabic is somewhat like our English cursive writing in that the letters are connected to each other. But in this form of writing, only the long vowels appear. The short vowels are diacritical marks. So the first objective is then to figure out what exactly are the words we're talking about here and what are their grammatical cases to make a coherent thought. So that has to be figured out. And then we can come up with a transliteration. So here it's إذا طلعت العقرب جمس المذنب ومات الجندب وقرب الأشيب. So you can hear that rhyme at the end of each phrase. Okay, so then we translate it, and we have when the scorpion rises, the thin tail-like rivulet congeals, the locust dies, and the white hoarfrost draws near. Okay, that's interesting, but it doesn't rhyme like the original. So let's try that again. When the scorpion rises, the valley rivulet freezes, the locust ceases, and the hoarfrost approaches. Okay, now it rhymes. But if I do this for all of the stars for which there is this kind of rhyme, everything's going to rhyme on rises or rise. So let's see if we can mirror the Arabic and rhyme on scorpion. And so then we come to this. When rises the scorpion, frozen is the valley run, the life of the locust is done, and the time for hoarfrost has begun. Now we're there. And so that's the process that I go through for each of these. And that's why I mentioned back with the moon rhymed prose, it's still in process there because I don't want everything to rhyme on old. So here, if we look at the content then, the little tiny rivulets in the valley are freezing, the locust is dying because it's cold, and hoarfrost has started. So we're talking about a wintry time frame. All right, so if we look at the parts of the scorpion, it's different from our modern day Scorpius. We often picture Scorpius with its pincers folded against its head. And that's because modern day Scorpius is only part of the full scorpion that used to exist in our skies. Way back in Babylonian times, the scorpion was what you see here with pincers out front. That's modern day Libra. And at some point, it was decided that Scorpius was too long. The sun spent too much time, and so the pincers were cut off in order to create a separate zodiacal constellation, Libra, that would then be a place for the sun in a wholly separate month. So the Arabian scorpion did retain the pincers. So we have a Zubana in the front here, and this gives rise to our 2 favorite star names to say in modern astronomy. Zuban el-Janubi, which is the southern pincer, and Zuban el-Shamali, which is the northern pincer. And then going further down, we have the crown, el-Iqlil, and then the brilliant red star Antares is the heart of the scorpion, el-Qalb. These 2 small stars next to the heart were the aorta, and today our modern star names are el-Niyat 1 and 2, and el-Niyat is the Arabic term for aorta. It's because the heart hangs on that artery. And then we have, of course, the tail going down to these two close stars here that were together called the raised tail of the scorpion. And so each of these elements had their own rhymed prose. In early November, and the time frame is a little bit shifted. For us, you would add about 3 weeks due to precession of the equinoxes. But in early November, some 12 to 1400 years ago, the pincer would rise first, of course. And here it says, when rises the pincer, cold is the front incisor. Another variation, when rises the pincer, it creates concern for each household leader and humiliation for every she-camel breeder. And once upon a time, says the storyteller, so gather for your kin and do not lose vigor. So here, this is a description essentially of the night becoming longer, because with more time in the night, there's more time to tell stories. Once upon a time in Arabic is kana wa kana. It was and it was is how those stories would start. And then gather for your kin and don't lose vigor. This talks about the need to gather supplies as things are becoming scarce with the onset of winter. And then a little bit later, when rises the crown, each husband can't keep his desire down. Again, there's more time at night. And then this apparently applied to camels as well. When rises the crown, camel stallions won't settle down. Gathered up is the gown, and torrents trigger a meltdown. So here, the rains of fall are becoming abundant, and so you must gather up your gown as you walk. And then the flash floods are becoming a problem. Next, when rises the heart, like the dog, the winter does start. The desert dwellers fall apart, and the camel stallion can have only a female with a fat underpart. So here, we're going to come back to the dog in the winter in a moment. The desert dwellers are getting concerned with the increasing problems in finding food. And the camel stallions here also have a problem. So as food becomes scarce, sometimes female camels have pseudo pregnancies where their milk comes, and so they have the increase of fat in their underparts, but they don't actually have a pregnancy. And that's due to their emaciation. And then the tail, when rises the raised tail, the daughter hastens the frail, the family head is pressed by the needy whale, and it is called a winter at wondrous scale. So now we're in mid-December, and we have the increase of felt need. The winter is more wondrous. This is that original sense of it's intense to create that awe and wonder at how serious the winter is. Okay, so let's come back to winter like a dog does start. So here I've circled the heart of the scorpion as it rises, and then another star way over here rises at about the same time. And so as they rise together, these were called the two grumbling dogs. And in Arabic, the term is al-hararan, and it's onomatopoeia, because you can imagine this dog grumbling and growling, but not aggressively. It's just uncomfortable. Harar, harar. And as you would see it in the twilight, this happened because this is, again, the end of November, and it's getting really cold, and dogs are becoming uncomfortable as they're staying outside at night. So they were the two grumbling dogs, and they have their own rhymed prose. When rise the two grumbling dogs, fat animals lose their backlogs, the winter season slogs, and into their hands children exhale fogs. So again, the winter season is growing long. Fat animals are losing their fat. And then into their hands, children exhale fogs. I love this one. We again have onomatopoeia. In Arabic, that phrase says, wa wahwahal wildan. So wahwaha is the verb. And it's like this, wah, 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 literally blowing into your hands to make them warm, right, as you're outside. So beautiful description here. Okay, so then let's do one more and look at the ostriches. That was in our earlier chart as the moon progressed through our November coming up. The ostriches are 8 stars. You might recognize this as Sagittarius. 4 of them are close to the Milky Way, so they're the drinking ostriches, and 4 are further from the Milky Way, so they're the returning ostriches, those who have already drunk in the river and are returning to their nest. And we also have the wasteland nearby, this area without bright stars, and that is where their nest was. So here we have rhymed prose for the ostriches. When rise the ostriches, the quadruped blanches from hoarfrost that never stanches. On every grazer the cold encroaches, and every sleeper's slumber it glitches. So the 4-legged animals turn white due to the hoarfrost that never ends. And the cold is becoming more intense, again, on the grazing animals, and then on everyone who tries to sleep, their sleep is disrupted. When rise the ostriches, crumbled are Tihama's beaches, every sleeper the cold reaches, and with slanderous gossip the shepherd snitches. So again, here we have the sense that there's too much time on people's hands, and so people start to tell stories and gossip. Tehama is the region of Western Saudi Arabia, where the land is flat before it hits the mountains, and it's very sandy land there. And so as we get into the winter time with the various storms, and I'm sure you who are living in Albuquerque see this yourselves, how under those conditions the land can just separate and disintegrate. Another one, when together flock the ostriches, clouds engulf the sky's riches. And this is an interesting one because we have the increase of the fall rains. And so the ostriches, you can see it's quite a large grouping. And so it takes a couple weeks for all of them to rise. And so as they increase one by one, the clouds increase one by one. And then this is a variation on that also brings in the winter solstice, the night of winter solstice it is. And in fact, when the ostriches are in the middle of their rising, again, this is before we account for precession today, it was right around the winter solstice, December 20th or 21st. And then for the wasteland, when rises the wasteland, every long-owned animal becomes enlivened. Or when rises the wasteland, with wall barley sprouts, the earth is blackened. Eaten is clarified butter's sediment, and it is said to the cold, relent. This wall barley sprouts blackening the earth, they would start to sprout in the midst of the winter. And so in Arabic, that was compared to the blackening of a man's face when they didn't shave and the stubble was reappearing on their face. It's again, a neat connection with deep imagery there. Okay, so lastly, standstills of the moon. And here I'm just going to talk briefly about the ranges of the moon's motion. So if we go back to the first moon visible in November. This should be about November 3rd, or it could be the 4th, depending on your local conditions and your eyesight, actually. We can see the top line here is the ecliptic. This is the path that the sun takes in our sky. It's the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. And then the line below it is the path that the moon takes across our sky. And we can see here that the moon is a little bit below the ecliptic. And then as it progresses through the month, it crosses the ecliptic. This is around day 11. And then in further days, it'll be above the ecliptic. And this is because the moon's orbit is tilted about 5 degrees, slightly more than that. And so the moon moves north or south of this path in the sky. And so it has a range. And every month it gets to the northernmost part of this range and the southernmost part of this range. And so over the course of a whole month, it varies by 10 degrees up and down compared to where the ecliptic is. And so if we look back at these asterisms that fell along the moon's path, we could see that here, for example, if the moon was a little bit further north, it might miss the wasteland and be closer to this asterism, which was called the ostrich nest. And we see in the Arabic literature, as they're describing the path of the moon and the asterisms, the 28 lunar stations that were very important, we do see them talking about, well, you know, sometimes the moon misses the station. It goes above and hits this other asterism, or it goes below and hits this other asterism. Excuse me. Over here, in the case of the front spout and the rear spout, the moon would normally be actually quite well below those asterisms, but sometimes it would appear much closer to them than normal. And so Arabs recognize this monthly cycle of standstills. And then, of course, this year in cultural astronomy, we have a major event happening, which is the major standstill. So as the moon orbits around the Earth, we have this +5, -5 degree cycle, but the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees. And so if you get everything to line up just right, then the moon's +5 degrees can add to the Earth's 23.5 degree tilt, and you get the moon moving far outside the path of travel of the sun. It's in a place the sun could never, ever be. And then as it flips back around, we've got, 5 degrees on the other side. Again, it's at these extremes. And so this is what we call a major standstill. And this involves 3 different motions that all have to line up just right. And so it's an 18.6 year cycle. And that's why there's been a lot of attention this year on the major standstills. We don't have evidence in Arabian astronomy from the literature that exists of their observation of major and minor standstills beyond the monthly occurrences. But we do see this beautiful example from Chimney Rock. And if you haven't been watching, Griffith Observatory has been doing a really nice series of live streams from Chimney Rock showing this view. And what's important about this view is that this is the moon rising at this time of major standstill, and the sun never reaches this point. The sun at most would rise over here outside the chimney. So this is one of the very rare instances where we have excellent archaeological evidence that they figured out this very long duration lunar cycle. All right, so thanks very much for being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions about stages, stations, and standstills.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Let me switch my layout. And yeah, we'll open up the floor to questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning about thinking about the Arabic traditions before imprint of Greek, Chinese, and Indian overlay. And so, you know, with what you were telling us about, like, if you could parse that out a little more, that those differences, but also when we're talking free Greek, are we also, does that mean Babylon and Sumerian influences? And can we get back to a point where we're making distinction between non-herding peoples, you know, hunter-gatherers? Is there any of that imprint left, or is that pretty gone?
Yeah, those are great questions. So first, on the time frame, I'm looking at astronomy in Arabia that existed before the introduction of Greek astronomy to Arabia. So this isn't before Greek astronomy in Greek lands.
Right.
I mean, actually, it may have been, but we literally run out of written records because Arabic writing started after the inception of Islam in the early 600s. Writing was an important need to standardize the language of the Quran. So there was oral tradition for millennia before that among the Arabs. And of course, if you think about Petra within Nabateans, those are Arabs too. That's going back even further. And so we just don't have the written record. So I'm not talking about what existed before Greek astronomy itself existed. I'm talking about what was inherent or developed among the Arabs before foreign astronomies came in. And that would have been around the middle 700s, middle to late 700s, as the massive translation movement started. In terms of differentiating traditions from sedentary versus nomadic peoples, we can see some of this in the context that we get from these descriptions, and even some of the star names. You know, there's a lot of camels in the sky. There's a lot of herding of, you know, sheep and goats and various domesticated animals that we see in the sky. But then we also see mentions of behavior that's possibly sedentary. So, you know, that's as far as we can get distinguishing things. A sad point is that in the historical literature, the Arabic source text that I'm drawing from, they almost never distinguish which tribe they're talking about. They only say the Arabs, which artificially homogenizes the people because there were hundreds of distinct tribes in the peninsula. And so that ability to differentiate can only happen when we come upon a piece of poetry and we know the poet was from a certain tribe. So those are the only cases.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Devin. I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'm wondering, you didn't mention lunar eclipse or solar eclipses. Was there any literature about that, or like how they interpreted those events?
Yeah. So certainly they observed lunar eclipses and solar eclipses both. There were and are different ways to interpret those events. For example, I was in Libya in 2005, I think it was, or 6 for the total solar eclipse there. And some Libyans decided that they could not look at the eclipse because it was, a bad sign. Others decided that they had to look at the eclipse because it was part of the work of God. And both of those people took their interpretations from the same piece of Islamic tradition. And so, yeah, there's variations in how to interpret, how to behave under an eclipse, even today.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Danielle. Any other questions from anyone online? Then if not,
I do have a question.
oh, Chip, sorry, I completely missed you there. Chip, go
Hi,
ahead.
Danielle, this is Chip. First, I just
Hi,
want to
Chip.
thank you for giving this really interesting talk. It broadens our horizons here considerably compared to what we normally listen to and discuss. So thank you for that. But the question I had was, what was the influence of Chinese and Indian astronomy on the native Arabian astronomical philosophy and science?
Ooh, that is a whole talk. That was a core piece of my dissertation. So let me see. In some, indigenous Arabian astronomy went through 3 encounters with outside traditions. The first encounter was with Islam. As that faith tradition developed, of course, it developed within Arabia, but there were specific admonitions against using a set of stars called the rain stars, because many tribes attributed agency to those stars for bringing the rain, and that's not something that works very well in a new monotheistic religion. And so those practices were targeted, and you find early Islamic leaders who know a great deal about the sky refusing to admit they know what they know because it was not a favorable piece. So that essentially targeted, this deep connection to the sky as something that needed to be purified. But when you're in the desert, rain is everything. We've seen just today in what I shared how rain impacts the sayings and the culture. And so what happens is, as the translation movement gets going in the middle to later 700s, Indian astronomy appears to have been translated first. Islamic leaders borrow the system of Indian nakshatras and adapt it to their own. And so that's the system of lunar stations. And so they basically take the names that already existed in the sky and overlay the system of 28, supposedly evenly spaced, but they're not, asterisms. And so now, instead of the stars having agency, it's just 28 boxes in a calendar without agency. A box might have no rain, or a box might have rain. And then, so that started changing the structures, but the names and the content of Arabian astronomy was largely intact. But then with the introduction of Greek astronomy, over time, you see Islamic leaders, Arab, Persian, adopting the Greek picture of the sky wholesale. And so you find in around 1000 CE, Al-Biruni, the famous astronomer, he is berating the Arabs for having the audacity to envision the Pleiades star cluster as the fat tail of the fat-tailed lamb, when of course it's part of Taurus. And so you have this transition over just a couple centuries of this adoption of the actual Greek pictures of the sky. So when you look at a Sufi and his maps of the sky, those are Greek pictures of the sky using Arabic names for individual stars or smaller groups of stars. And so today in our modern skies, we see the vestiges of that. Vega, Altair, Betelgeuse, those are indigenous star names for indigenous asterisms. But other names like Denebola or Deneb in Cygnus, those are Arabic descriptions of Greek pictures of the sky.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Any last questions, comments, concerns from anybody that's online or in person? Then if not, Danielle, once again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And then before we head out, just one more announcement. Next week, Zach Sharp will be giving a lecture, so please join us for next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you guys so much. Everyone have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your week.